Welcome to America's Heroes Group.
And welcome to America's Heroes Group with our partner, the Jesse Brown VA. September is National Suicide Prevention and Hispanic Heritage Month. Today is Saturday, September 9th, 2023. Happy birthday, Mom. And our host is Kelley. I'm Sean Claiborne, the co-host. Our executive producer is Glenda Smith. Our digital media producer is Ivan Ortega of Scouts Arnold Productions. And of course, we have today our wonderful panelists, as always. We have Michelle Langlois. She is a licensed clinical social worker, prevention program coordinator at the Jesse Brown VA. And we're going to talk about suicide prevention, a very serious topic, and what is happening at the Jesse Brown VA around this topic. How are you doing today? We don't have audio for you. Hold on one second, Michelle. Our audio it's not going right now. Can you try to? Can you speak? Can you speak now? See if we got audio. Michelle.
Yes.
There you are. We got you. So did I say your last name right? Is it Langlois or Langlois?
Langlois is the proper pronunciation, but Langlois is fine as well.
So you do a lot of work with suicide prevention. So you have over 20 years experience with crisis intervention, mental health, which includes 15 years of experience serving America's veterans. You've done a lot of work at the Jesse Brown VA with suicide prevention. Before we get into the meat of the conversation, I was curious about how, first of all, you got involved and what brought you into suicide prevention. Such a very, very difficult job to tackle.
How I got involved. To be quite honest, I took a crisis intervention class in graduate school, and I realized that is what I wanted to do for a living. That was kind of my calling. That was where my interest was. I worked in a level 1 trauma center here in Chicago in the emergency department for many years. And then the VA was looking for individuals social workers to be in their emergency department. I got that position, and suicide prevention seemed kind of the logical route forward in the VA, since that's such a number one priority for the VA with our veterans. I saw a lot of veterans really struggling in the emergency department, and then kind of really fell in love with really working with these really critical veterans that are in need, and excited that I could do something to make a change for this population. So I've been doing that for about 11 years for suicide prevention, and we've been growing every year with our department, with our initiatives, and really making sure that suicide prevention is everybody's business, so not just in mental health, or with my program with all of medical. We go out in the community now. We have social workers on my team that are actually developing partnerships and coalitions with all these other agencies and entities within the city of Chicago. We also cover Northwest Indiana, just to provide support so we can reach those veterans who maybe don't come into the VA. So it's exciting that we can do all these wonderful things to really help reduce veteran suicide.
So I know it's very difficult for an average person to kind of detect if someone is really going through a crisis where they're actually thinking about committing suicide. Sometimes there are signs, though, subtle signs or other things that people can detect. What are some of the things that people can look out for if they're around someone that possibly might be having suicide ideation?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and because I think that in our culture we don't talk about it a lot of people really don't know what to look for. And so certain things to look for, because not a lot of people are going to always come out and tell you they're having suicidal thoughts. I know a lot of veterans I speak to are very concerned about telling people because they think that they'll be judged. And so a lot of folks are struggling with these thoughts. So you have to look at other things. So some things to look for is people who would be talking about feeling hopeless. They don't see a future for themselves. Nothing's ever going to get better. This is kind of a final situation. They can't see other alternatives. And so it's this kind of finite way of talking, especially about their future. They might also be talking about feeling like a burden. I'm a burden to my family and friends. I have to deal with these things. And so these are statements and ways people can talk that are somewhat socially acceptable. So when people start getting in that kind of suicidal way of thinking, a lot of times it comes out of these hopeless and burdensome statements. You might see people giving away their belongings or getting their affairs in order, things that looking for ways to die. like getting their weapons, trying to get a weapon from someone. That is actually not unusual. We see that. They're trying to ask for weapons from their family and friends. They might do certain things that are really risky. So they might do things that are very, very dangerous that could lead to death. Maybe they use or they drink, but that's becoming really excessive. They might be playing with their firearms. We have a lot of veterans who will play with their firearms, do Russian roulette and very dangerous things with their firearms. We might have people who try to provoke police officers or get in more fights, maybe stop really important medication that they should be on, maybe life-saving medication. We do see quite a few veterans will stop dialysis, or they might mismanage medication that they're supposed to have that could also create a pretty lethal situation. And so look for behaviors that people are doing really dangerous things. And another thing that they might be doing is pushing people away. And so that isolation and then withdrawal from like their normal support systems, that can be definitely an indicator that somebody is having these pretty strong thoughts of suicide, and they may want to act on those by pushing folks away. They also might have really a kind of an elevated emotional presentation. So maybe they're super depressed, but maybe they're super angry, or maybe they're an anxious person, but their anxiety is really, really high for them. So it's not where they're normally at, and it's a really kind of heightened way their emotions are right now. That might indicate that somebody's really struggling. So those are certain things to look at that might be more not specific to reporting thoughts of suicide, but some people will tell you they're thinking about death more. They're thinking about maybe what the afterlife would be more, so they're talking more about death or dying or suicide. They might tell a lot of jokes about it, and so pay attention, even if it seems to be unjust, especially if you know someone's going through something. So a lot of people who die of suicide, they do say certain things like that a lot of times people kind of brush off or don't necessarily realize is serious. So, if you definitely hear somebody reporting, being direct about having thoughts of suicide or death, doing really, really risky behaviors, driving really erratically, that could be really dangerous. These are folks that probably should be seen right away.
And the things that it's interesting because these types of behaviors might actually push people away, like friends and family members who may not want to be around someone who's doing these types of things, especially if they're driving erratically with you in the car, or they're talking about, joking about death, or, buying weapons and things like that, which I would imagine could actually make the situation worse for the person who's experiencing these types of thoughts, because then it makes them more isolated. Yeah. Did you see that? Yes. I think you kind of cut out, but yeah, definitely that could push people away, especially, you're using more, you're having this more erratic behavior, more dangerous behavior. Some people might kind of cut you off and then and kind of leave you more of that isolative place, which actually increases your risk of suicide. The more connection you have, the more that can actually protect you if you're struggling with thoughts of suicide. So, but you're absolutely correct. Some of these behaviors might push people away, and that makes that person just that much more vulnerable. So at least a note to the veteran community out there and family members who love someone and care about someone, that person might be going through a tough time. Don't just cut them off. Maybe take the time to investigate and ask the questions about it. Now, on that topic, is it okay to ask someone if they're thinking about suicide, or is that like planting the idea in their head? Yeah, so that's actually a myth. And I do a lot of trainings, and a lot of people believe like if I say something that might give them the idea to maybe do something to hurt themselves, and the research doesn't support that. Really, what's going on is, as I mentioned before, a lot of times people are struggling and they're not telling anybody. And so if we encourage people to ask the question, and that's what we want people to do, then that will allow that person to finally open up, get that support they need, not maybe feel so isolative anymore, have that connection with another person, and finally get that person some care. So that is kind of misunderstood, and people are very nervous about asking that question and planting the idea, but that's not really what's happening. What you're doing is now allowing that person to really get the help that they need for whatever their crisis is that's leading to that suicidal thought. Wow. I'm glad you brought that up because sometimes we have feelings about it, strong emotions about it, but we don't have the knowledge or the information, the facts about what really works, what doesn't work. So just leaning on your emotions, you want to get away from the person because maybe they're bugging you or you're worried about that they might hurt you some kind of way. But really, reality is taking extra time and step to just get to know and ask that person a real serious question. Are you thinking about suicide? Is that the reason why you're acting so erratic? Is that the reason why you're drinking more or taking more drugs or driving crazy or doing things that aren't safe for yourself or for people around you? Now, if you're worried about someone, how can you help them? What are some of the things you can do to try to mitigate this problem?
Well, asking the questions is definitely the first start. And you actually ask the question properly. Are you having thoughts of suicide? We want people to ask it very directly like that. A lot of times it's kind of an anxious conversation for the person asking. And so a lot of times people might ask it, you're not having thoughts of suicide, are you? And that kind of has a judgy feeling, and it's kind of a leading question telling the individual that you want an answer to be no. So asking the question properly, just directly, is going to go a long way. What I tell people is to always kind of recognize why you're asking the question, like what did you see? Like what are you noticing? Those red flags that I just kind of mentioned, and why you think maybe this person might be struggling, because then it kind of allows that to kind of go into that question easier. But if that person is definitely having thoughts of suicide, there is a lot that can be done. A lot of times people think that suicide is not you can't do anything about it. It's not preventable. It's very preventable. There's lots that you can do about it. And so what we do when we look at suicide, we look at reducing the risk factors. And so if somebody's struggling with thoughts of suicide because they lost their job, maybe they're struggling with some depression because of that and they're drinking more, we can target that with, let's get them some maybe employment services, especially at the VA. The VA has a lot of these resources. Let's help with maybe getting you some treatment for your depression, possibly for your alcohol, maybe reduce that or eliminate that entirely. So we try to target the things that are making an individual more at risk. So treatment is really, really effective. There's lots of different kinds of treatment, not just medications or even therapy, but we have group therapy, we have art therapy, we have lots of different kinds of things people can try. If they, I'm not taking meds is something I hear a lot. Well, hey, you don't have to. There's all these other avenues that we can go and try to address some of the things that's kind of creating this crisis and leading to these thoughts of suicide. So getting somebody into care is really, really important. Or getting the resources to address whatever the risk factor is. And so if somebody is imminently suicidal, you definitely want to get that person into the emergency room for an assessment right away. So they might possibly need an inpatient admission, possibly maybe that will kind of jumpstart getting them the outpatient care that they need, even if they don't have to go in the hospital. But if you definitely think there's imminent risk for anybody who's having thoughts of suicide, you think they're going to do something, you really do want to contact 911 or bring that person in directly to your local emergency room or to your VA. And if you don't already know this, Jesse Brown in Chicago has a mobile crisis team now with a veteran social worker and a veteran police officer so we can kind of avoid EMS entirely, because we know that can be a bit triggering for a lot of our folks. And they can go out to that home and talk and assess that veteran and help that veteran where they're at to avoid EMS and try to get them engaged in care. So there's lots that we can do to try to get people engaged in care and address those risk factors.
And it amazes me when I was doing research for this segment. It brought memories back of a friend of mine who I remember the last thing he did for me. When he was going hunting, he bought me some. He killed a deer and brought some deer meat, and I had never had deer meat before. And right after he gave me this ground deer meat, shortly thereafter he took his own life. And I kept thinking about, to this day, this is probably close to 20 years ago, but I keep thinking about today, his little girl and his wife, his wife now widow, and what her life would have been like. 'Cause after that, kind of lost contact with the family, and this young girl who was a child at the time is now an adult, and I wonder how that plays in her mind, knowing that her father at an age where she's old enough to understand what happened, but maybe not then having the tools to process the reasons and the aftermath of it. And with that, before we run out of time, because we have about 3 minutes left, I want to make sure people know that if you're having thoughts of suicide, there is a toll-free number hotline, which was launched in July of 2020. It's 988. So if you're having suicidal thoughts, you can call the suicide hotline, which is 988. You can call them directly, press 1 after you dial 988, or you can even text the hotline at 838-255. That's 838-255. And also, we can also chat. They have a chat available at the Veterans Crisis Hotline. That is the veteranscrisisline.net. That's the veteranscrisisline.net. So the last thing I wanted to get into before we have a little bit of time left, quickly in the last 2 minutes, lethal means safety. That is a real thing that could help and could have possibly prevented the death of my friend. What does lethal means safety and when it relates to suicide?
Yes, that is really one thing that everybody can easily do to help reduce suicide. For anybody in your home, 71% of our veterans use a firearm for suicide, comparative to about 50% of the general population. And so what we try to do is we try to encourage our veterans to come up with a plan to lock their weapon up temporarily while they're feeling in this crisis. And most veterans are actually pretty cooperative with that. So the safest thing you can do is store your weapon outside of your home. So shooting ranges sometimes will store your weapon, or storing at another family's home or friend's house or another buddy that you serve with that has a lock, so you can't get easy access. If you do have a locking mechanism in your home, have the key be with your partner or somebody else who lives there, or have that partner change the combination. So if there's an intruder, their partner can grab this weapon, but if you're not feeling safe and you're thinking about grabbing the weapon, you can't have easy access to the weapon. Most people change their mind with suicide attempts, but with a firearm, you don't have that opportunity. And so any time and space, even if the veteran lives alone and has it just locked up with their ammunition separate than their firearm, by the time they get the lock and the key and grab all these pieces, that hopefully might give us enough time for people to change their mind. And so we really want that time and space, and that something that lethal away when somebody's feeling in crisis at that time. And so lethal means safety is definitely something that we try to educate people on. And the VA has free gun locks. So anybody who has firearms, you want a gun lock for your firearm, we'll give you as many gun locks as you have as firearms, not a problem. They're free, no questions asked. You can usually get them from any of your providers at the VA. We just ordered 1,000 more locks for this month because it's Suicide Prevention Month. So definitely come up and grab some of your firearm locks if you need to secure that weapon in the home, especially with anybody at all in the household who's in crisis. That really can be the difference between life and death by just having that secured.
And on that note, I got to end this conversation. I appreciate you coming on our show and also giving us this great information. Make sure, veterans, that you go to the VA and get your locks, your safety locks for your weapons, and also keep your weapons, make it hard to get to. The longer it takes you to get to your weapon, the more likely you are to survive if you're having suicidal thoughts. This is America's Heroes Group. We'll be right back.